This is Miss Mejia, and we are back with week 2 of our language arts sessions. And for week 2, the students, they will not be engaged in as much activity like what we did last week. The reason why they will not be doing as much this week is because last week some of them did not submit assignments, and I want to give them the opportunity to catch up with the others. So all of them will be working on assignments and pending activities for the second day of this week. So only one language arts lesson will be covered, and for this language arts lesson I will focus only on one component, which is a reading comprehension component. We continue to look at poetry and we go further in depth as it relates to poetry. So the students, they will be looking at elements, features, poetry terms. We will continue to use the same poem that we had used last week, which is The Rights of the Child. However, the students, they will also be introduced to a new poem this week, which is Knock It Me Home. With this poem, with the new poem for this week, I want to see how well the students are following with these lessons and activities, and see if they will be able to analyze and interpret information from a poem on their own. So that's what we'll be covering for this week. Also, the lesson that I will be showing here at week 2 will not have a full component. So I will not be showing the introduction. I will not be showing how some aspects of the development. I will not be showing the closure. I will mostly focus on how I guide my students through this activity of identifying, defining elements, features, and poetry terms. Then I want to guide them through the use of a poetry web in order to analyze a poem, chart information using that graphic organizer. So they will not really analyze, but they will look at a poem carefully, examine this poem, and they will collect information from it. And that information will be placed into a graphic organizer. Hello, boys and girls. Are you ready for today's lesson? This is Miss Mejia, your language arts teacher, and I'm sure you are excited about today's lesson. Let's get right into this. First, I want to take the opportunity to welcome all of my students to this new week. We will continue to work with poetry, and we will continue to work with Unit 3 from our Language 3 textbook. Everybody clear? Very good. Let's continue. Before we start off, I need my students to have the following materials. It's important to come to class with your materials. You are here to learn, right? Good. So can you collect these materials for me? Or by now you should have them in front of you. I would like my students to have your language arts notebook and a pen. I have already uploaded the graphic organizer that we will be using, which is the features of a poem web. You should have that in front of you. And I also need you to have copies of the 2 poems. The first one is The Rights of the Child. That poem we have been using since last week, and we continue to use it this week. You will also need a copy of the new poem that you will be introduced to. This poem is very important because you will be working on it individually at home. And the title of that poem is Knock It Me Home. It doesn't sound grammatically correct because this is a poem written in the Creole language. Alright, boys and girls, let's get into this now. Let me give you our objective. It's important for you to know what is the objective of today. I don't want you to leave from here and say you don't learn anything. Our objective for today is with the aid of a graphic organizer or web and discussion of the poem, Rights of the Child, you will be able to examine. You will examine that poem and you will use the graphic organizer to chart descriptions of the different features of a poem that we will outline today and discuss in class. At the end, you will then define and identify lines in the poem that are written in the simple present tense. You will also analyze a poem and answer questions pertaining to features and terms used in poetry. For the lesson for today, we will go into the content. Let me share what exactly we will be discussing and what you will be doing. So let's go into the content or the concepts that I have placed here in the classroom for you to use. I have already sent you some notes, so you should have that with you as well, because you will need this note as we go along. Please have your notes with you. Have your pen and your notebook so you can copy down information if you need to. Like I told you, we're looking at different poetry terms, and we're also looking at features of poetry. But what is poetry? We have been reading, we have been looking at poetry. What is poetry? Poetry is a literary work in which special intensity is given to the expression of feelings and ideas by giving the use of distinctive style and rhythm. So poem, boys and girls, have a distinctive style and a rhythm to it. Now we're going to look at 6 features of poetry. The 6 features that we'll be looking at today is the stanza. We will look at the verse of the poem, the mood, the tone. We are going to look at lines, and we're also going to look at onomatopoeia. Are we clear? Good. Let me now explain to you what each one of these mean. The stanza is a division of a poem consisting of 2 or more lines arranged together as a unit. Now look at your poem. We're not reading the poem, but I want you to look at the poem, The Rights of the Child. This is the poem that we're focusing on. Stanza is the division where you see there is a space in between. That's where a particular stanza ends. So you will look at their poem in front of you and count how many stanzas are there in this poem. Let's move on. Verse. What is verse? Verse has come to represent any division or grouping of words in a poetic composition, with groupings traditionally having been referred to as stanza. So sometimes you will hear authors and readers referring to stanzas as verse as well. The third part, the mood. The mood, because you will be looking at the mood of this poem as well. We have read it several times, so you'll be looking at the mood. The mood, boys and girls, is the feeling created by the poet for the reader, for us who are reading this poem. To find out the mood of a poem, ask yourself, how did the poet want me, the reader, to feel? The mood of a poem might be, for example, it can be happy, it can be pessimistic, gloomy, mournful, sorrow. So there are different moods that can come out of it. Romantic, realistic. The mood is what the poet creates for us, the reader. The tone. The tone is the feeling displayed by the author towards the subject of the poem. The tone is the feeling displayed by the author towards the subject of this poem. What is the subject of this poem? The subject of this poem is the rights of a child. So, that's the subject. Now, what is the tone? What is the tone towards the subject? You need to ask yourself again, what the author is trying to display. So whenever you look at poetry, boys and girls, you need to really examine. I am going through these carefully because I want you to use your poem in front of you, look at it, and try to think about these questions that I am asking as we go along, because you will need it for the upcoming activity. Number 5, we continue with features and terms, poetry terms. Onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia is a word that sounds like what it refers to. It's the combination of letter sounds in the word imitate the natural sound of that object or action. So onomatopoeia, boys and girls, is a word that imitate the sound of whatever something makes. What are some songs? Boom, crack, smash, woo, wee. So those are examples of onomatopoeia. And a lot of poets like to insert onomatopoeias into their poems that whenever they are writing, because onomatopoeia brings out mood, it brings out expression, and it's good to use because remember, a poem is very expressive. The final feature that we are looking at is the line, poetry line. A line can be identified as the string of words before a break. Even if a sentence is not completed before the break occurs, this is still called a line. Now, for example, a 2-line stanza, boys and girls, if it's only 2 lines and there is a break, that stanza is called or is referred to as a couplet, meaning pairs. If it's a 3-line, it is referred to as a tercet. So there are different ways how we refer to 2 lines, 3 lines, 4 lines, poetry stanzas. Alrighty? Now let's further discuss what you will be doing now. You need the poem. We will read this poem together as a class, and then we will ask ourselves some questions after reading the poem. Are you ready for the reading? Okay, so after we read this poem, I want to ask you, were you able to identify any onomatopoeia in that poem? Did you? Which one is it? Wow, bang, bang. You are right. I like that. So that's mean you are following. What about a line? Did you find any line? Well, of course, there are so many lines, but I want you to give me an example of a line from the poem. Hold that thought because you will be using it shortly. What about a stanza? Let's count the stanzas for this poem. Let's count it together. How many stanzas the poem has? You think about 4? You sure? Let's count again. That's right. It has 7 stanzas. Wow, I love this class. Now, we read this poem with expression. We create this feeling. We had this sense. We know now exactly what is the mood of the poet. Now, answer this question for me, boys and girls. What is the mood of this poem? What is the mood of this poem? Do you think it's frightening? Do you think it's pleading? Do you think it's a serious poem? Or do you think it's an envious poem? Do you think it's frightening? Do you think it's envious or serious? Right, it is a serious poem. Serious situation that is going on with this child. Let's proceed. What about the tone? The tone is what the author, the feeling that the author display towards the subject, and the subject is rights, children's rights. What is the feeling towards that? You think he has a powerful feeling, a strong feeling, a feeling of hope? So what is the feeling? Think about that answer. Now let's move on to this graphic organizer, because remember I told you that I want you to chart information. We already went through the questions and we answered some of them as well. Now I want to present this chart to you. Remember I said we are going to examine the poem. We read the poem. We answered some questions. Now we are going to chart this information using the poetry web. Looking at the stanza. The stanza consists of 2 or more lines. We counted the stanzas. And how many stanzas were there in this poem? Right, 7 stanzas. The mood. The mood is the feeling created by the poet for the reader. What is the mood? We discussed that earlier. The mood is serious. The tone, feeling by the author towards the poem's subject. And this author is frustrated with the situation. Everybody turning their back on the poor child. Frustration, right? Because the child is not being looked after. Remember I told you that you're going to chart your own information using the No Keep Me Home poem. So make sure you are following along. Are you? Okay. Line. Line is the string of words before a break. What are the rights of this poor child? That's a line from the poem. You can extract any line from the poem. A line is a line, right? Remember that because you're going to do your own. Onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia imitate sounds. So therefore, we were able to find an onomatopoeia in the poem, and it is bang, bang. Alrighty, boys and girls. So for your activity at home, you will create a chart like this or your web. I want it to be nicely colorful. Please add pictures if you can add pictures. Let it look beautiful. Put pride in your work. So you will have features of poetry at the top, and in the middle you will put the title of the poem that you are going to use, and the title is No Keep Me Home. After that, you will read the poem No Keep Me Home. You have it in front of you, right? That's the poem that you need now, boys and girls. So after you read that poem, you will answer the questions. There are 6 questions that you are going to answer. After answering these questions, you will go back to your chart and insert whatever feature or um, feature or terms you have identified in the poem No Keep Me Home, you will chart it out on your poster at home. Question 1 reads, how many lines are there in each stanza? Question 2, what is the poet's tone? Question 3, what is the mood of the poem? Question 4, did you identify any onomatopoeia in the poem? Question 5 reads, which line rhymes? Question 6 reads, what are the child's reason for wanting to go to school? And after you have completed those questions, you read your poem, you answer the question, you fill out your graphic organizer, you make it nice, beautiful, and neat, you will upload it in Google Classroom. Boys and girls, you can do this on your computer at home. If not, then you use your materials. You will take a nice picture of it. You will upload it in Google Classroom so that I can see your work, and I will be providing you with feedback. Remember, boys and girls, you need to complete all pending assignments for me. You have some from last week that you need to submit, and now you have this one that you will be submitting as well this week. Thank you for participating, and next week we will continue to work with poetry again. So we will be doing this for a while. Bye, boys and girls. Take care.